right? I think it's a beautiful thing to want to be the best in the world at what we do, right? Because we all have purpose. We all came to the planet to contribute something, and to want to bring forth the best that is within us is a beautiful thing. I think that's a desire to unfold. That's true ambition. And I think that's lovely. But when we are contorting ourselves and twisting ourselves into a pretzel to quote unquote win or be the best for some arbitrary measure, I always question the why there, because usually it is because I didn't feel good enough as a kid, or I feel like to matter, I need to have all the money. To matter, I need to be a unicorn and sell my business for X amount of dollars. And there's a lot of dysfunction in there. So I think everyone gets to have whatever they want. If you want a big, beautiful business, gorgeous, I will help you get there. But let's do it in right relationships so you're not hurting yourself, other people, and the planet in the process.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Dreamcatcher podcast, a place where your dreams can find a voice. I'm your host, Celine Chenoy. Thank you to all of you who return every week to tune in to become a better version of yourself. Make sure you hit subscribe if you haven't already, and rate our show if you enjoy this episode. It has been estimated that the average person will spend 1/3 of their life at work. That's roughly 90,000 hours at work over your lifetime. Given the time we'll spend at work, making it as fulfilling as possible makes sense. My guest, Amina AlTai, believes that we can achieve that by infusing passion into what we do and creating a work-life balance that honors our values and needs. She's here to share her thoughts. Amina AlTai is a holistic business and career coach, podcast host, proud immigrant, and chronic illness advocate. As an executive coach to notable leaders, founders, entrepreneurs, and impact-driven celebrities, Amina's mission is to help individuals unearth their purpose. She also helps progressive companies such as Google, Deloitte, Roku, and more create cultures where everyone can thrive. During this interview, Amina and I will discuss ways to find purpose in our careers and align our work with our passions and strengths. We'll also discuss creating healthy boundaries to avoid burnout and the risk of neglecting other areas of our lives. Hi, Amina. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. It is lovely to connect with you. And I'm really excited to talk about a topic that I really am interested in. I'm sure a lot of other people are, and that is how to infuse passion and purpose into our careers and lives. I know that this is something that a lot of people struggle with, and they really need guidance on how to navigate this minefield. How often do you encounter this problem in your work as a career and business coach?
Every day, whether it's working one-on-one with clients or working inside organizations or even giving a talk. And, the Q&A part is always filled with, how do I find my purpose? How do I make my corporate job more purposeful? Literally every day we're encountering this question.
So, Amina, you co-founded a branding agency, and you say that on paper, you were successful, but in real life, not exactly. You were actually quite overworked and you were not feeling very well. So please tell us more about that and how things unfolded for you.
Yeah. So today I'm an executive coach, but before I was a coach, I worked in marketing and brand management, and I started my career in luxury goods. I worked for companies like Cartier and Dolce & Gabbana. And after a while, I decided I wanted to co-found a marketing agency, and it was with someone I'd gone to school with. And it was really exciting at the time because we were working with emerging female entrepreneurs, which is exactly what I wanted to do. But I didn't have boundaries. I was deeply codependent. I put everybody ahead of myself. And then 7 years in, I got really, really sick. And I'd been to about, I think, 7 different doctors before one could really figure out what was wrong with me. And it turns out that I had 2 autoimmune diseases. And my doctor called me one Friday as I was going to work, and she said, if you don't go to the hospital now instead of going to work, you're days away from multiple organ failure.
Mm-hmm.
And
Wow.
so, yeah, exactly. So I had to really change my relationship to work and to success and ambition and all of the things. And that coming out of that is where my coaching practice was really birthed. After that, I went on what I call my Eat, Pray, Love year. I went back to school to study coaching, mindfulness, nutrition, nervous system work, all the tools to feel better in my own life. And then when I did, I really wanted to teach it onward. So for the last 9 years, I've been offering sort of that holistic approach to coaching.
Did you feel somewhere along the way that you were heading for burnout? Were there any signs that
Yeah.
you noticed?
Yeah, I was young at the time. Hindsight's 2020 as well. And at the time I wasn't super in tune with my body. Like I'm an elder millennial and I noticed that Gen Z is just so in tune. They have a very different relationship to work than most millennials had and Gen Xers had. They're much more likely to prioritize self-care. I read a study that said Gen Z is more likely to consider their menstrual health as part of their self-care and taking a day off for it. Even quiet quitting falls into self-care for them. So they're just much more on top of it. I was not. I was not in my body. And so I was having all of these symptoms along the way. I would feel really sick. My hair was falling out. My weight was up and down. I had brain fog, extreme fatigue, all of these different things. But I wasn't listening. And there weren't that many role models either at the time that were going at a sustainable pace. Everybody was kind of hustling and girl bossing and tech broing. And so there weren't great examples. And so I didn't know to listen to my body until my body was so loud. I was like, there's no other choice. I have to listen.
Mm. So for people who are listening and who are experiencing these symptoms, what advice would you give them?
I mean, we get our lessons when we get our lessons, right? I coach so many people that have the symptoms, or there's like a small whisper from the universe that they should make a change. But we only make a change when we personally are ready and when we are in the place that we've had enough of our own garbage, So as much as I tell people, we have to get the lesson ourselves. But if you are feeling discomfort and friction and you feel like you're ready to change, listen to your body, let your soul speak, invite yourself into discovery, let curiosity lead. Don't wait until you're super sick if you can avoid it. I wish that I had listened to those whispers and didn't wait for the universe to shout. But like I said, we all get our lessons when we get our lessons.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And you also call yourself a proud immigrant. And I would like to speak about that a little bit. I'm curious to know, how has your cultural background influenced your work and how you approach wellness?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So my cultural background's definitely influenced how I approached work. So I'm half Iraqi, half Welsh. And so a lot of Eastern cultures are collective cultures, right? So collective cultures means that we take care of the collective. We're in it as a community, whereas Western culture is much more individualistic. But the thing about collective culture is if we don't have some semblance of boundaries, we can tip into codependency. And I think that's what happened for me. I was so used to putting others before myself that when I got to work, I wasn't being collective, I was being codependent. So I think it kind of set me up for a little bit of a wobbly relationship interpersonally. And then the other thing too, so the Welsh side of the family, my grandmother was an entrepreneur. She started her second career in her 50s, which was very inspiring. But she came from a very poor coal mining family. And so the story in that lineage was we work so hard and basically until it takes us out. Both of her parents and her grandparents all kind of succumbed from their injuries from coal mining, whether it was like actually in the mine or illness afterwards. And so we all had this story around work of you work really hard until it makes you sick. And so I can see how both sides of the family, both lineages kind of set me up for a little bit of a dysfunctional relationship with work and why I really had to heal the lineage. And I think one of the most healing parts has been coming back to practices of my roots, practices of my family, coming home to myself and saying what feels good for me versus trying other people's practices that are popular or in the zeitgeist that actually have nothing to do with me or don't support my particular body.
I have parents who are immigrants, and they actually do. They also display those traits. I mean, they were hustlers. They worked hard, and they didn't have a lot of
boundaries between, their family life and their work life. They worked a lot, basically.
Mhm.
So I can definitely identify with that. And thank you for sharing that, by the way.
Yeah, of
Yeah.
course.
And I want to talk about a word that you used just now, codependency. That is
Yeah.
something we usually associate with relationships. And I had no idea that we could manifest codependency in our workplace. So, yeah, please tell us a little bit about that and how that happens.
Yeah. So codependency is more typically known interpersonally. However, we can have a codependent relationship with lots of things, right? A codependent relationship with work is when we are outsourcing our worthiness and we're over reliant on that space for our worthiness. We're sourcing our esteem from that place. That's my definition of it. And that can happen with colleagues and coworkers. It can happen with work itself. It can happen with the idea of success and our dreams and what we want for ourselves, but we're outsourcing our worthiness and we're over reliant on that thing or that person to feel good about ourselves. Like we need it and we can't stand on our own without it. And I see this all the time in my practice too, because 98% of my practice is women, 60% are women of color. And a lot of them also come from collective cultures and kind of have that similar familiar thread that I did. And we have to kind of rewire our relationship with work and overgiving and sorting our way internally versus externally, because so many of us are wired to get the shiny object, the award, the accolade to feel good about ourselves. But that becomes dysfunctional because there's never enough awards or dollars or achievements to fill a hole that's on the inside.
And Amina, how do we know when we've crossed that line, when it has become codependent and we're making it all about the accolades and the praise?
Yeah. We usually take some sort of a hit for it. So I took a physical hit for it, right? My body was like, hey, we can't do this anymore. A lot of people take emotional hits for it. Maybe they feel really anxious, depressed, overwhelmed, overworked. It's when it starts becoming sustainable. And then I think it's really important to come back to our why. Like, why am I doing this? Like, why do I actually want this? Do I want this because it's aligned with my higher calling and my highest good? Or do I want it because I want to quote unquote win or be the best? I think we will start to see sort of fractures in our relationships with work, in our relationships with others, in our relationship to our bodies. And then it's important to come back to that why.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think that whole drive to achieve and be more, I think that culture, especially in the individualistic cultures like the United States and a lot of the European countries, that can also really influence us, the way that we go about our work and our schedules and everything.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm working on my first book right now. It comes out next spring and it's about ambition. And I talk about two types of ambition. So one is ambition that's fueled by our core wounds. And that's when we're trying to win and get all the awards and we'll step over people, we'll harm our bodies to get there. And then there's more purposeful ambition where we're clear on our why, where we're more collective and we care about our community and the people around us, where we're in right relationship with our service and we know the impact that we want to have. And so a lot of us, because it's kind of the dominant paradigm, are taught to come from that more painful ambition versus the purposeful ambition.
I love that. But they often say that if you really want to rise to the top, you have to have that obsessive kind of drive to really kind of win. And I don't know, do you think that is true? Like most people who have really, really succeeded big time, at some point in life, they did not have that balance.
Well, I question two things, right? What is this desire to win really about? What do you really want, right? I think it's a beautiful thing to want to be the best in the world at what we do, right? Because we all have purpose. We all came to the planet to contribute something, and to want to bring forth the best that is within us is a beautiful thing. I think that's a desire to unfold. That's true ambition. And I think that's lovely. But when we are contorting ourselves and twisting ourselves into a pretzel to quote unquote win or be the best for some arbitrary measure, I always question the why there, because usually it is because I didn't feel good enough as a kid, or I feel like to matter, I need to have all the money. To matter, I need to be a unicorn and sell my business for X amount of dollars. Yeah. And there's a lot of dysfunction in there. So I think everyone gets to have whatever they want. If you want a big, beautiful business, gorgeous, I will help you get there. But let's do it in right relationships so you're not hurting yourself, other people, and the planet in the process.
Love that. And you also talk about something called the passion tax. What does that mean, and how does it impact people in a negative way?
Yeah. So the passion tax is also known as enthusiasm exploitation. And it's basically when we're passionate about something at work, and then those around us at work, whether it's the C-suite, our managers, or our peers, see that we're passionate about that thing. And then they're like, oh, do more of it. You love it. So let's say I really love marketing and being on sales pitches for marketing projects. People see that I'm really passionate about that. And they're like, oh, do a couple more pitches. And then over time, I'm doing a lot more extra work and I get burned out because of it. And so it's wonderful to be passionate about something, but a lot of times organizations will co-opt that and then it becomes exploitative. So we need to really set boundaries around what we're passionate about so that we don't burn out and that it can be sustainable, because otherwise we stop loving the thing because then it just feels like an extra burden.
So what should we do instead?
Set great boundaries. Like, love the thing, great, but don't do it until you're so bedraggled and exhausted that you don't love it anymore. So I really love coaching. I love it so much. There's nothing better than being in a space with people, holding up a mirror, reminding them of their greatness and helping achieve what it is that they want to achieve. But if I did it for 9 hours a day, 5 days a week, I would not love it. And so I coach 2 days a week. The rest of the week, I'm working on my book. I'm working on thought leadership. I'm doing sales so that I have a healthy balance with it. And I've set boundaries around it. And I have boundaries around how my clients can contact me so that I'm not always in the coaching dynamic and I become burned out and fall out of love with it.
So don't get too much of a good thing, right?
Well, set boundaries around it, right? I always say we want to live above the resentment line. If we live below the resentment line, we're resentful, right? So I love doing this thing, but if I do too much of it, I'm going to feel resentful. So where's the tipping point? We want to ask ourselves that.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to find what that is for us. It should be different for everyone.
Exactly. And it can be with our work. It can be with money. It can be with overgiving in relationships. We all have a different resentment line.
Okay, great. Something else you talk about is purpose. And you say that a lot of professionals don't feel a sense of purpose in the work that they do. What can you start doing to create that shift? I mean, it can be hard to do, especially if you really need the paycheck, right? To pay your rent, to pay for basic living expenses.
Totally.
So for people who feel like their job, what they're doing is not aligned with their purpose, what can they do to begin changing that?
Yeah. So prior to the pandemic, Deloitte did a study and they found that 4 out of 5 people were somewhat dissatisfied with their jobs. That's like 80% of people if we look around a room, right? That's wild. And I think that doing purposeful work is a function of 5 things. It's about getting on the court with our zone of genius. We all have a zone of genius and we want to work in it. It's about being values aligned with the work. It's about being connected to the impact that we want to have, whether it's on our family, the community, or the greater good. It's about finding joy in the work, and it's about having our needs met. And when we have all 5 of those things spinning and functioning well, we're in purposeful work. But to your point, right? The idea of having purposeful work can feel really far away for so many people. It can feel like a form of privilege that's only for the select few. But one of the things that I love about this work is that it doesn't have to be all or nothing. We can start with 10 minutes a day in our zone of genius and work will feel much more purposeful. We can start with bringing in a little bit more joy and work will feel more purposeful. So we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, as they say. We can start with just an additional couple of minutes a day in spaces that we like better. And over time, work will feel a whole lot more aligned.
Can you give us an example of a client who did that?
Yeah, for sure. So I had a client who was a lawyer and they really were like, should I leave the legal profession? Like, I really am not enjoying what I'm doing. And we looked at it. We looked at her zones of genius, and her zones of genius were very much about like moving, like she's a larger than life personality. She could like really move a room. She was very passionate, particularly about women's rights, but she was working in financial services, mostly doing contracts. So we were like, you're not using any of your genius. What if we shifted you into a role where you were less behind a screen, you got more face time with people, and you could also focus on the area of women's rights that you really liked? And so we shifted her into an organization It was much more values aligned. They cared about women's health and she got to focus on that. There was some contract work, which she was really good at, but she got so much more face time and to use her voice and to move a room, which she was really good at. So that's just a very simple example of identifying what she was amazing at and then looking at how that didn't measure up in her current role and then finding one that checked a lot of those boxes.
And you also coined a term called genius stacking. And you say that it's an effective way to discover our gifts. Is that the same thing as finding your zone of genius, as you just mentioned?
Every person in the world has a zone of genius. It's the place that we are off the charts amazing. The thing is most of us don't think that we have genius. And that's because we've been taught that genius looks a very particular way. We're taught that like Einstein's a genius or Marie Curie, right? We're taught that it looks a very specific way. But in reality, everybody has a form of genius, whether it's making soup or like mapping the human genome. We all have a version of it. And so we want to find yours, and we might have multiple of them. And then where the game really changes is when we put those multiple versions together. So for example, I have a client who's also a coach, and one of her zones of genius is holding space for people, like creating a really lovely container where people can unfold. And it also is helping people see their gifts. And so when she puts those things together, it's this really incredible, very differentiated offering. And the same is true for everybody else. When you put your forms of genius together, we create a differentiated offering. And the thing that I love about that so much is that it takes us out of scarcity. Nobody's going to put things together the way you're going to put them together. So it just makes us really differentiated and standing in our own shine. And that's why I love genius stacking so much, because no one is going to do it the way that you're going to do it.
Oh, I love it. And how can people find out what their genius is, like where their zones of genius is?
Yeah, I actually have a worksheet that I can send to you to include in the show notes. So one is about unearthing our purpose that focuses on the zones of genius. And then the other goes deeper around the zones of genius. The 3 E's is what I call them, that will help people really figure out where they shine. And so I'm happy to share that with you all.
Oh, thank you. That's very generous of you.
Yeah, of course.
Amina, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us to share your knowledge. I'm sure that many listeners will resonate with everything that we talked about. And yeah, I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such a joy to share with you and to connect with you. You're doing such beautiful work, and I'm just grateful to get to sit with you and share.
Oh, thank you so much. So I just want to let our listeners know, if you want to learn more about Amina AlTai and her coaching services, programs, and products, please visit aminaaltai.com. The link will be in the description.